real reason we're here is for a debate. Lucas has made the bold claim. This is episode 1 of our great debate series, by the way. Lucas has made the bold claim that he thinks that America is the greatest country of all time. But first, a bit of a... Oh, well, we don't have the book here, so we can't do the book recommendation. But starting next week, we're going to start with a book recommendation on the weekly.
For those viewers who wish to enlighten themselves, broaden their knowledge, especially about the topics that we're going to be discussing, we will be recommending several, 1 or 2 maybe, books, so that, well, for that very reason.
You want to know how the motherfucking 3 empires get their knowledge? Well, we'll recommend you a book.
You read. Incredible, I know.
So, well, Braille.
Braille.
No one ever taught me to actually read.
Oh.
Yeah.
You know, another thing that explains the alcoholism.
So, without further ado, let's get straight into it. I'd just like to establish the rules of engagement. So, anytime there's an interruption, I'm going to act as moderator, by the way. Anytime there's an interruption, you must have a shot. Anytime I detect an overt logical fallacy, there will be a penalty. I'm looking at you. I feel like a referee. I should have like a striped shirt and a whistle.
All right. What counts as so our viewers know, what counts as a logical fallacy?
So a logical fallacy is basically any incorrect, something that's based on a faulty premise, right? Slippery slope's an example. If you're like, oh, this happens, therefore this must happen, and this will happen. Is this what you want with your America? You know?
Yeah, any error in argument.
Any argumentative error, essentially, yeah.
Okay.
Will be punished severely. With a shot.
Jeez.
I know if it was me with my alcoholism, I would be committing logical fallacies left and right just to get shots. If you interrupt your partner, I'm looking at you, Lucas.
Okay.
I'm looking at you. Deadpan in the eyes. If you interrupt, that will be punished by a shot. Violent assault is encouraged.
Encouraged, oh boy.
I encourage violent assault.
Well,
If
there
you
goes our
fail,
YouTube revenue.
now, if you fail to answer one of my questions sufficiently to my liking, you will also have a shot.
Okay, that's entirely subjective though.
It is, but I'm not going to be
We have
like,
to trust them.
well, it wasn't. I'll be a fair moderator. I
Alright.
will. I'm not going to intentionally handicap you guys, although that would be funny. And any ad hominems you use must have something to do with history.
Okay. Sounds good to
So,
me.
these are my rules. I have a series of questions for you guys. In case the debate gets stale or circular, and there's just aspects of this I'd like to cover. Now, some will challenge your point of view, some will challenge your point of view. At the end of the day, I want to get to the bottom of this big debate of, is America the greatest country of all time? So, since I think it's Lucas who's made the extraordinary claim, I should allow him to...
Yeah, give me a couple sentences here to address the country that, like Star Wars, everybody loves to hate, right? We love to hate America. America is the largest. It's the largest thing in front of our eyes when we wake up every day. It's easy for every criticism on the face of the earth to fall their way, and I can completely understand why. Now, my claim is that America is the greatest country on earth. It's the greatest country in the history of countries. It is the greatest country, and I use the term great. Great doesn't mean best in all aspects of quality, right? We're talking about great in sheer scale, in how much they encompass. And when I measure greatness of a nation, I get all of their achievements, all of their contributions to the human race, whether that be direct or indirect. And I balance them out with all of their follies, all of their shortcomings. And for a country as big as America, there are a countless amount of shortcomings. There's follies at every corner, at every decade. There's a war every 4 years. They're ridiculous. They've got a laundry list of constant follies, decade after decade. And I don't deny that. And I'm not here to deny that. I'm not here to argue about the individual cases of misconduct that America's carried around the world. It's carried a policy of a very militant-like foreign policy, a very militant-like cultural policy. I'm not here to defend a lot of their negative elements, right? I'm here to prop up their achievements, because that's really where I feel the achievements of America and their legacy overcome their shortcomings. So that's what I'll be here to defend. And we can go on a point-by-point basis, but I'm all about the achievements, right? And that's pretty much it. That's my opening statement. That's my premise. America is the greatest country in the world because of their achievements.
Now, before I get into your point, I just wanted to ask you a quick question. So, not just so we're because I definitely want you to get at what he says like a rabid pit bull and just try and tear it apart.
Oh, no, no. I have no intention of being aggressive. I mean, I have lots of points to rebuttal you, is to say that America is the greatest country in the world. I personally would disagree, but I'm not going to sit here and say that America has never done anything worth noting, because could not be further from the case. The United States is probably one of the greatest innovators that the world has ever seen, especially within the second half of the 20th century, rather.
Okay,
and
roll credits.
And going into the 21st century, the United States has been a giant propagator for technological advancement, to name a few things, among them being technological advancement. However, saying that it is the greatest country in the world, or that has ever existed, I think the claim is not only audacious, but it doesn't really, it has a very interesting, like, how do you determine that? By what measurement are you comparing every nation that's ever existed to this one? And it just seems a little, not nonsense, but it's definitely for lacking, you know?
You're trying to say that it's kind of a hard point to quantify.
Yeah, I understand that you feel that it may be the greatest country in the world, and you probably have a great deal of points supporting it, but how are you comparing it? To whom are you comparing it more than the others? And it's just, until I fully realize, or until I fully understand what you mean by the United States is the greatest country in the world, I have nothing to say against it, because, well, anybody can say anything's the greatest compared to something else, but I still have no idea what you're talking about.
So, the criteria is vague, right? It's provocative. It's a provocative statement for sure.
Yeah.
That being said, as I said, it's just lining up their overall achievements with their overall shortcomings, weighing them out, and comparing how that stands up against nations that are similar to America. So the Roman Empire would have been one, with pound for pound, the same amount of influence, right? The Persian Empire would have been one. These are the great epicenters of culture and power of their day. So I stack them up against that. It's unfair to get a country like Canada, who I think overall, as far as quality of life, it's a more quality nation than America is at the moment, and compare it with America, because it doesn't share the same circumstances as America. It doesn't share the same problems. America's taking on the world, effectively, right? And that's why Shahob, I compare it to Rome. I compare it to Persia. I compare it to ancient Greece, because we've got to line up what are the world's superpowers at any given time. And out of all of them, who are the best? And that's where the term great comes in. Because, again, in Canada, even though we have a better quality of life, America's still the greater country because they have more people. They've got, more innovation. They've got a bigger army. They've got a broader culture. They got more influence. So I'm not comparing isolated little Sweden and America. I'm comparing the superpowers to America. Its competitors, Russia, Rome, Persia. And when I feel like you stack them all up to the advantage America has in time, I just feel like none of them hold a candle. At least none of them have yet. I'm sure there's going to be a country in the future that'll surpass it. But historically, I don't think anyone's done what they've done.
I'm going to have to disagree with you on that. I think the United States is specifically, as you said, on top of the world, because that they have taken the models, the examples of all these great powers in the past that you have previously mentioned, and they used all this collective knowledge that their founding fathers, no doubt, were well schooled in, and brought them together to form one cohesive nation. However, I think as a cohesive nation, it has still failed when you compare their individual accomplishments to the grander scope of historical nations. For example, let's start with a smaller subject, and actually a rather large subject if you think about it. The United States stance on slavery has, for the majority of the nation's existence, been rather backwards. Now, slavery is a primordial practice of humanity. It is something that has been practiced since civilization first came to being in ancient Mesopotamia, and I am more than certain that, given historical patterns, it has some sense of reemergence, not just in the form of indentured servitude or even actual slaves that still exist in certain parts of the world, like India or Qatar or elsewhere. But the United States, being as mighty as it is, had its laws officially abolished when it comes to slavery in 1991 in Mississippi. Well after probation, well after Jim Crow, well after everything that has happened in the United States, and it still didn't have a unilaterally declared notion that slavery should not happen anymore. Now, comparing that example to one of the more ancient sort, Persia, the Achaemenid Empire, under the founding of Cyrus the Great, he was wise enough to know that slavery had to stop immediately in order for cohesion to truly take place. And it was that very notion that allowed the Persians, well, the Achaemenians anyway, to flourish for nearly 300 years, more than 300 years. But of course, the practice immediately fell right back into practice. Practice fell back into practice, even after Alexander overthrew them. However, just that example alone suggests that the United States might not be as on top of the world as you suggest.
So the counter question for me would be, given that, and that's a valid point, right? The Americans like to pretend it never happened, but yeah, for the longest time they were behind Europe by like 1,000 years. If that makes them not the greatest, then who is? And so we get back into that line of thinking of, well, who are we comparing them to? And you brought up Persia, right? And Persia had some pound for pound, being very liberal for their time at one point, has some merit against the states. But then again, in the long run, when you compare them, where did the Persian experiment at that time end up 300 years after, 400 years after, and where did the American one end up? And I feel like the Americans, they had a leash on their people for the longest time. They had slaves. But their model of free expression, I think, led them to self-improve and be self-critical in a way that other countries fundamentally couldn't. And that's why I think over time they beat out every other empire, because socially they're more progressive than any superpower has been before, right? And for them to be low on the corruption index, be socially liberal in the 21st century, and be the world's strongest nation, and if we're talking pound for pound military, they're stronger than any ancient empire was. Like,
If you're talking about purely military strength, I mean, yeah, but you also have to take into...
sorry to interrupt. Accompanied by. Okay, I'm gonna drink. Sure.
Wait, hold on.
Accompanied by.
Whose interruption was that?
It was mine. Yeah, give me the shot.
Was it your interruption or was it his?
Hey, sorry. Can I finish the point?
I thought you had finished.
Listen.
I'm moderator. I'll give you 2 shots.
All right.
I need a whistle.
I'm gonna edit all this out.
Yeah. Listen.
Don't edit it out. We want them to see the raw free empire. Listen.
They have the biggest military, but it's besides the point. I'm saying they achieved that while being socially progressive than people you can compare to the states that also have large militaries.
Now,
they are socially progressive. They're in the 21st century.
I want to
socially progressive, absolutely. I do absolutely agree with that. As far as social progress goes, in terms of just people being able to express themselves, absolutely. The United States has been able to allow for that. However, it seems a moot point, seeing as how the United States military spending seems to have such a high level of importance over even the education of its own citizens. Now, an interesting dogma, I'd say, how the vast amount of military spending the United States altogether spends on its military, and the tiny, minute amount, by comparison, to the amount they spent on their education, and yet they have this ability to allow their citizens to express themselves. It's interesting in a way that it's unexpected, because how is it that a country that could be much more educated seems to be able to have the expression and the ability to be as progressive as it is? An interesting point. However, I think the amount that it spends on its military is by itself an enormous detriment to its country.
I'd agree.
The United States is the most heavily indebted nation or entity in existence. The fact that it continues to thrive as a nation is beyond me, beyond my understanding of economics or social economics. However, I'd imagine that's something that's definitely going to bring them not down necessarily, but definitely lower than it will ever see.
I'd agree with you on that rabbit hole, absolutely. Like I've got my problems with America. The military-industrial complex, I think, is its biggest problem because it's related to the budget, it's related to everything. But that's besides the point. I get back to my question: if they aren't the greatest, then who is? Because someone has to be.
No, I don't think so. See, I get your point. I do understand that you know, as far as the strength of, well, not even the strength, but the ability to look at one epicenter that every other country should compare itself against. And the United States could fit that role. However, it shouldn't, because of not just its military spending or its lack of education funds, or even how cruelly it's treated its own, denizens for the majority of its existence, and how it still continuously treats its denizens, the Aboriginal peoples, and even to an extent the way their law enforcement treats African Americans or minorities. It's beside all that, because the United States, being this beacon of social progress, being this grand superpower, it still doesn't necessarily qualify for being the greatest nation in the world, because I think no nation that exists currently truly fits that model. I think the closest countries that fit that model are the ones that take the care of its citizens first, like Sweden, or really any other Central European nation that exists. But that's only in one category. To say a country is overall the greatest, I don't think you can even properly say that about any country. But that's just the way I feel about it, and I definitely don't feel that the United States is the greatest country in the world. That's, again, just the way I feel.
I wanna flesh out your point there. I've got a question. So, ultimately, given that, and both of you can agree that there's a ton of problems facing America right now, realistically, we don't know what those problems are going to lead to, right? Whether they're going to be able to the United States can be able to overcome those problems, or they're going to lead to its eventual collapse, because frankly, we're too close to tell. Ultimately, would you view the United States' legacy thus far as ultimately positive or negative?
I'll let you answer that. Or I can answer it first. If you
Are
like.
you asking to Shahob or myself?
Are you asking me or him?
I'm asking you.
Oh, you're asking me.
Because I think Lucas's point is very clear, and your perspective is very clear as well.
Right.
I'm just curious as to whether you think their legacy is ultimately a positive one or a negative one. If you were to
That's a good question.
That's a great question. It's a tough one to answer too, because I see the founding of the United States as probably one of the greatest achievements that humanity has ever come forward with. Because, and this is do bear with me, the United States was founded on a set of principles written down in codified law by very, very powerful men, very intriguing and overall sophisticated gentlemen who came together and decided that they had no notion of imperial rules governing them or their families, which is a very admirable, very commendable thing, and the United States definitely deserves its credit for that. However, after its founding, after its involvement in the First and Second World War, and I know that's a giant jump, but again, bear with me, the United States since 1945 has attempted to overthrow more than 50 foreign governments, each of them being, for the most part, democratically elected, and has caused the end of life for millions, give or take, and agony for tens of millions more, and despair. And that is the current modern-day legacy of the United States. Many people, save us who are learned in history, and even some few who are educated in general, know the United States at its foundation and at its core was based on the notion of positivity. However, its current legacy is one that leaves all the nations of the world in fear and in torment of this great nation. And that is why I do not consider it the greatest nation in the world.
So if I could kind of clarify your point, just for my own understanding, before I give you a chance to rebuttal that. So ultimately, you think the principles that it was founded on were good, but somewhere
Yes.
along the way, and you're kind of pinpointing that around the world wars, is when the United States lost what its founders set out to achieve.
It is,
And set out on a very different path.
Yeah.
That's kind of where you stand?
I absolutely stand like
Okay.
that, yeah, because I see that these, men like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, the list goes on of the founding fathers, these men abhorred imperialism and control of that sort for themselves, and yet their descendants have this very different but still an imperialist notion of their place in the world. And although they don't take the British example and just go there and conquer the territory and claim it as a colony, they still go there with the intention of having direct control over these places. And that, a different model, but still an imperialist model. And has nothing to do with the betterment of those people. It has everything to do with their agendas for the betterment of themselves. And that is abhorrent to me.
So from what I've gathered, you're saying that the imperialist policies of America disqualify them, in your mind, from ever being on any list of greatest countries because it's...
No. I don't think it disqualifies them. I think it definitely shines a light as to why it shouldn't be, more or less. I do agree with you. to an extent, that the United States should absolutely be on these lists for the amount of reasons you brought forth, and it deserves its place there. But I don't think it should be noted as the greatest.
So again, I got to get back to this. What does? Because it almost seems like you've sort of disregarded any kind of assessment of greatness here, as if it's not important. But the thing is, I feel it is important. I feel when you're dealing with superpowers as large as America or as large as the Roman Empire, you've really got to assess them for all they're worth. And I feel like that's how we really track value. You said the legacy of the 21st century, the legacy of the post-Eisenhower military industrial America has been that of much negative, many negative aspects surrounding that. However, I think it's a bit of a blanket statement. I don't think it's all been negative. Look at what the States has done from post-World War II to now with their influence. Countries in Europe are experimenting with exporting political ideas. America exported industry. I think America brought way more, like as much as damage as they've done. Like, I'm not denying everything he said. They've done damage. But along with that, they've exported so much good, so much enlightenment, so much innovation. And I know that's a tricky thing to say when you're talking about imperialism, because imperialism, there's so many aspects to it that are completely and utterly negative and ugly. I'm not denying that. But post-imperialism, post the influence that America has, and we can agree that America's a more enlightened country. They're a Western country, right? They're a more first world nation.
Sure. Yeah.
Having a nation like that having influence around the world is so much better than the alternative, which would be Russia, or in my opinion, even worse, China, as your father figure of a nation. So I don't think that the latter part of the 21st century was at all even half as bad as you're describing, because I feel like you were leaving out, again, their accomplishments. Everything you said as a criticism was correct. Everything you said was true, and I'd agree that it's completely heinous, the shit that they've done. But when you stack it up to the good shit that came along with that, that needed that ugliness to take its place, again, I still see it as the greatest. I still see it as the greatest. To address your point of that example you gave about, their interventions and whatnot. Because I don't disagree with you when we're talking about the negative traits that America has. But I'm trying to get you to see, in my perspective, why I think they're the greatest, spite that, right?
I don't know.
Spite that.
See, when I see the United States, I see them purposely, supporting the nations and ideals that very much, I guess the best word to use would be sodomize certain amounts of people in order to turn these people who are would-be enemies and ensure that they stay as low as conceivably possible. I see the United States supporting nations, not overthrowing them or they're intervening within their politics, but supporting nations like Saudi Arabia, so supporting Israel and the Zionist right-wing government that currently inhabits its political power. And I see the kind of damage these two nations, just these two nations, are capable of doing within the regions that surround them. And then I also see what they've done to the entirety of Latin America, what they continue to do to Latin America, how they have stranglehold over places, not just like Venezuela, but also places that they previously had no control over, and they had to intervene. Places like Chile, places like Argentina, places like, even to an extent, Brazil and Mexico. I can't look at their accomplishments without looking at the country as it is, the very, on the map, as I look the United States in the face, and I see the blood that drips from their hands. I can't look at them as a nation with all their accomplishments and not bring all that together. You have to be able to judge, and I really hope you see it from my perspective, that you should absolutely judge a nation based on its accomplishments, and you should definitely be in support of that. However, you should also see all the negative that comes with a nation and then realize that all of it makes it less than what you idealize it to be. And that's really my only, my.
So I think we're starting to enter a bit of a circle here, because I think what it's coming down to is you put a lot more value, I think, on the shortcomings of the United States, on all of their wrongdoings, I think, than I do when it comes to stacking it up against their accomplishments. And I think, if I can understand your perspective, that's part of the reason why you just can't get by that and agree with that statement that they are the greatest because of that. That's like, I think, the big roadblock for you, if I understand.
Among the roadblocks, I definitely would
among
say
the
that.
roadblocks,
Yeah. See, United States foreign intervention and military spending and all that aside, I think inside the nation itself is still very flawed. I think within the nation of the United States, you still have minorities who are, for the most part, and I know this is again another blanket statement, but the numbers don't lie. The minorities within the United States, and that does include Aboriginal peoples, are very much segregated and, well, segregated again, blanket statement, and are very much targeted by their law enforcement officials. Now, this is a long, ongoing debate, and I really hope we don't get into that, but it still is something that is worth noting, that within the United States, there is giant problems. And I think we should also talk about the American system of governance by itself as well. At some point.
I'd like to flesh that out actually, because I'd like to bring you guys down onto the specific level of certain issues. So I'd like to ask you guys both an important question, and this one's going to challenge your point of view a little bit more. Now, the United States, being a nation that's predicated upon individual liberties, and that's predicated upon giving its citizens every opportunity that it can to pursue a life of happiness and wealth. What do you think the legacy is of the recent information that's come out through WikiLeaks, the scandal with the NSA? What do you think that is? How does that fit into the overall American legacy? I'd like to ask that to both of you guys. And what challenge do you think that poses to the notion that America is the greatest nation of all time?
Yeah, so I don't think I'm going to disagree with Shahob here that that's obviously a terrible thing, right? That kind of supervision, that kind of monitoring of your citizens, it's completely antithetical to what America was founded on. Again, don't deny that. But then I get something like the NSA, and I stack it up to Silicon Valley. America's got this burgeoning industry of innovation that's unparalleled throughout any point in history. It also spies on its people. It also has a lot of foreign proxy wars. And so I'm getting these. And I don't deny the NSA is a bad thing. I think we're going to agree on that the NSA is a bad thing.
Very much so.
I'm getting them. And I think the fundamental disagreement here is, I think they outweigh the negatives. And, Shahab, I don't think you can get by the negatives. So I think that's the true point of disagreement here. Right? Like, exactly how much do we value the negatives? Exactly how much do we value the positives? And when we assess everything, we've got to assess it fairly. And that's the thing. I certainly hope that there aren't any biases going into this, because I think if I'm gonna compare Rome to one of its contemporary neighbors, like let's say Macedonia, post-Alexander Macedonia, it would be like a fool's statement to say Macedonia is greater than Rome. Because Rome was just greater, it was just more encompassing. I think it's a fair assessment to look at all of Rome's traits, their entire legacy up to that point. Then look at Macedon, assess all of that, and then compare them. And there's when I use the word great, there's clearly a size difference. There's a greatness to Rome. They got more people, they got more cultures under their umbrella. Their model is better, right? I can go on and on. I'm doing that with the states, and I'm doing that to other people I can compare to the states, right? Once again, you brought up, like, I think Sweden. I don't think they're comparable. I just don't, because Sweden doesn't have the challenges that America has to face, right? Sweden isn't in the same diplomatic position. Sweden isn't working with the same melting pot. There's so many little things that come to making certain nations have better qualities of life than other nations, right? Different circumstances, immigrants, social climates. Sweden's also, like, not as diverse as the States, for one thing. America's working with a very diverse pot. So a lot more challenges with America, and the fact that they've done what they've done, I think, is still impressive. A lot of it you can credit to their initial geography, you can credit to things outside of the American model. But all that being said, it's tough for me to compare a little nation with 20 million people to, like, a nation with 300 and something million people approaching 400.
I would generally agree with a lot of that, especially when you compare two nations that are not even remotely sharing the kind of difficulties that they're going into. Yeah, 100%. However, I think my main problem with the United States is that it was a nation founded on war. And it's that sort of mentality that has prevailed in its social, conscious thought, that war is the norm of existence. In the United States, since its very inception, since Since before the Declaration of Independence was ever even written up and signed, you had men who came from a different place, men and women who came from a different place, come to this country, see the native indigenous inhabitants, and decided to take their model of government, destroy a lot of their land, take most of it, and then ensure that this enemy would never rise up to challenge them ever again. Starting from that point forward, it has been a nation that has constantly been involved in almost every single major military involvement. And with that being said, it's that sort of mentality that the United States takes with it and continues to have. And that's definitely not something to bring up. That's definitely not something that we should celebrate and say that it is indeed the greatest. Not to my perspective, of course. That's just the way I find that war is not something to be romanticized.
I'd like to challenge that. Not challenge it, but I'd like to kind of get you to consider a different dimension to that. Now, obviously, we brought up Sweden, we brought up Central Europe, and I think those are excellent models of government. But this is going to be a challenge to both of your points of view, because you could very easily rebut this. Not so much as a challenge. I just want to hear your perspective on it.
Sure.
So, when I was formulating these questions, one thing that I thought of was that a lot of these questions that have these progressive models are able to exist as a result of NATO and America's military superiority. So, could you argue that the strength of America enables these more progressive models to exist? And that could still, you could argue that still is a reflection on America, that they have the benefit of seeing these positive models that are under their military protection, essentially, and they don't incorporate more. And that could be definitely a big factor to consider with it as far as social negatives to the United States. But what would you say to that point? I guess this one's a more of a...
No, I'm not too sure. You have the United States who does the things it does, and it does it for the benefit of its own people, and it does create a standard of living and a sort of continuity that allows for thought and expression to definitely flourish, because the United States, when you come down to it, allows its citizens, for the most part, to express any point of view that they damn well please, and they do it with great efficiency. They are able to ensure that not just in social progress, but technological progress and even economic progress, the kind of innovation that the United States has is unparalleled. And well, from what I understand, I'm not a very learned person when it comes to the kind of progresses that the rest of the world is making, and there may be others that surpass the United States in certain fields. But as a whole, and generally speaking, the United States' military superiority does allow, as you said, for that protection to keep in place that level of continuity for its people, and that's great. But is that really worth the kind of destruction that they've enabled throughout the planet? Is their safety and well-being so much more beneficial for the betterment of mankind compared to the rest of them? Who is to say?
Short answer, I say yes. Because we're not just talking about American citizens here. He brought up NATO. We're talking about the Western world here, right? Take America out of the equation of the Western world, right? Leave just Europe. Leave just Canada. What do we have, right? America's been a solid backbone to the Western nations that value, secularism and free thought, free expression. They've been a champion of a lot of these issues, and they've defended them time and time again, spite the military operations that are clearly imperialistic. Spite that, and yes, and you asked a question. I do think it's worth it. I think more people are saved than harmed that way than allowing adversaries to become more powerful and crush those ideals that America has defended, right? There's been a lot of inconsistencies. America's defended one ideal, left another one alone. They left Ukraine for the dust when Putin went in and started the rebellion in Donetsk and took Crimea. The states did nothing. So it's not perfect. But overall, throughout history, I think the Western world's been protected, and I think their large militaries acted as a deterrent. All the problems with it as it may. It's acted as a deterrent for other nations like Russia and China, who have traditionally acted, pretty imperialistly in their little regions, especially Russia. And I think it's been a tool of deterrence, and it's been effective.
Yes, on the point that yes, it has indeed been able to keep Russia and China at bay, and these people have, rather, these nations with their current ideals in place have no interest in supporting freedom of speech or progress or really anything that really goes against the safety and stability of the state.
Or human rights for that matter.
Or human rights for that matter, of course, yeah. That's even beside the point. I thought that went without saying. But, see, here's the thing. I find the United States model of democracy and expression and freedom of thought and human rights to be still in its infancy because it is definitely not the best model. The United States model of governance and politics is one that heavily supports capitalism. And by itself, capitalism is very harmful, but also very beneficial. However, talking about the Western world, Latin America is part of the Western world, more or less. And it has managed to come up with many innovations as far as the political spectrum goes. For example, going back to Chile, in, I believe it was 1973, where Salvador Allende was elected into power in Chile. And this man was a progressive social democrat, and he modeled his government very much with those ideals. This method of government could have led, if it had been allowed to, flourish, and the kind of thought and exchange would have been allowed to happen, this kind of government could have led the United States to becoming one of the most influential and powerful politically countries on the planet. However, the United States heard the word social and saw that they didn't see the benefits of a social democracy. They had no idea what a social democracy could have looked like. And instead of experimenting with it, as other thinkers in the past have done, they decided to quell it. They decided to destroy it at its root. The CIA orchestrated a coup to ensure that they put in place one of their puppets, Augusto Pinochet, to make sure that the government was silenced forever. The people who supported it were silenced forever, and that essentially Chile would be run by a dictatorship. They betrayed everything that they hold true as a political ideal to ensure that something new didn't emerge for the sake of their own safety. Now that, again, going back, this is of course talking about American interventionism, but it also talks about the kind of things that they're willing to do to ensure their method of thought over any others. They have no room of experimentation, not so far as we know anyway.
I disagree. Sorry, I just completely disagree with your last sentence.
If I may,
Sorry, real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
In the last 80 years.
But you interrupted the moderator.
Sorry, in the last 80 years, I gotta drive after it.
Where?
At the shop. My car's at the shop. The
Congratulations.
last 80 years, we've seen America, in my opinion, change faster than almost any country. Utilize their model of free expression to experiment faster and quicker than any country. And so I have to disagree with you. Like, it may feel like we're at a point of stagnation now because politics have become frustrating. But if you look at history and you assess the last 100 years, like, civilly, it's just not the case with America. They've gotten over slavery. They've gotten over segregation.
Eventually.
I gotta be honest.
Time and time again, the American model has triumphed.
Yeah.
And socially boomeranged back into the right hands. And even now, problems as it may, the States is still sitting on a bastion of social.
I think you're missing Shahab's larger point though, because I agree with you, but I think the last sentence he made kind of diverted from his original point, which, if I could summarize it, and correct me if I'm wrong, what I think he was trying to say is that American foreign policy, and the Chilean example is a good example of this, has been inconsistent at best. And what lives do we value more than others, right? So, in Western Europe, the United States, in a lot of cases, has been morally consistent. But it seems with the closer you get from the Western Hemisphere, the more the United States follows a policy of realpolitik, as opposed to upholding the principles that it chooses to govern by, right? And Chile's a good example. And I think one of the larger points that Shahab's example of Chile brings out is, which lives on this planet do we value more? Because as you get farther away from the United States, and their sphere of influence, more and more heinous shit tends to happen when they start to meddle in politics, right? As it's farther and farther out of the public eye. And, I just kind of like to get your take on that, because how do we compare the two? It's almost a bipolar foreign policy in a lot of ways.
very much so. And if I may bring up another example before we move forward. In Iran, in 1954, there was a prime minister by the name of Dr. Mossadegh, who was democratically elected, and this man was a very democratic thinker. He formulated his government as a democracy would, and very much took the American example. As we know, he has done exclusive writings about the United States and how brilliant their method of governance was. The United States, and oh, by the way, he dared to nationalize his own resources, namely oil. So the United States, in retaliation, with the backing of the CIA and BP and British and French Secret Service, ousted him from his position of power as prime minister and reinstated the Shah of Iran, a monarchist dictator, who was very much friendly, not a puppet, but very, very friendly to the United States, denationalized the oil and sold it in bulk to the United States. Now they did this all for the sake of their own consumption. And yeah, another example as to how American foreign intervention has been disastrous as a result.
I mean, another example that I don't deny, but I feel like these examples are just ineffective at addressing why America still, overall, is not the greatest nation. Because, like, I mean, I agree with these diplomatic follies. I agree with all these mistakes, these foreign affairs mistakes. Like, they exist. But I mean, if you want to compare them side by side, I could bring up, okay, America's intervention in World War II. I think it saved the Western world. I honestly think it objectively saved the Western world. I think fighting imperialism at that time was so important, as sad as it is to say. It's just bigger. It's more cataclysmic of an effect than all of these thousands of times the States has gone around the world and altered this and altered that. I think just that one instance, if you want to get instance here, instance here, instance here, I'd say their intervention in World War I, especially their intervention in World War II, almost outshines it, you know?
Perhaps.
Yeah, take your shot.
And I do understand.
The thing, sorry to interrupt.
Go on.
The thing is, I don't disagree with any of these, right? Like, they fiddled around in Latin America all the time. They're still fiddling around the Middle East. They're bad things. That's why I almost feel like I'm feeling like they're redundant to bring up, because I agree. But they've got to be directed towards, and this is why this outweighs their intervention in World War II. This is why this outweighs their contributions to civil innovation. This is why this instance outweighs all of that, and I'm just not seeing that, right? As terrible as the instances you're bringing up are, and they are pretty damn terrible. Like they're a Mongolian horde level of terrible. No one's denying that, right? I feel like you're failing to address why they throw America off the pedestal of being the overall greatest. I'm failing to see how it blends into the mixture.
Here's an important point to bring up that I'd like to you guys to address. America's current model, economic model, as a model that other countries can adopt, and a burgeoning nation, if a nation were coming up tomorrow, could take and implement. As it stands today, how do you think that stands today? As I guess what I'm trying to say is, how effective is America's current economic model for other countries to adopt? If not, what would you like to see tweaked about it?
Well, I'll be perfectly honest. I'm not all too aware as to what the American model of economics is, because I understand that it is a nation that is very purposefully diverted towards capitalism, and it has allowed for the free market to expand, I think. Again, I really have no idea. I mean, the economic model of the United States seems to be one that's working out for them so far. However, as far as I know, their current global debt to the massive multinational banks that exist in the world is well within like the high trillions. And that is an enormous detriment to the country. And beyond that, I really have nothing much more to say. I mean, it's possible that altogether it might be detrimental to themselves and to others, but it seems to have been working out so far. I don't really know anything else to say about it.
To build on his point,
That's worth a shot, my friend.
Thank you.
to build on his point, because I agree with him. The current economic climate in the States is that of short-sightedness. They're spending now, and they're worrying about the debt later, and it's building. The debt's compounding. Every administration since Clinton has spent an enormous amount. largely on military. Their deregulated economy as well allows a lot of corporations to flourish in the States without the taxpayers reaping as much benefit as they should. And for clarity, I'm not saying you ever assume this, but I am the last person to say that the American model is a perfect model. Or even like the best that's maybe ever existed. I think you could look to smaller countries for an example of that. But I'm saying the model they have, while compared to everything else they've done, getting back to it, makes them the greatest. Their utilization of capitalism, going back to your point on how it can be utilized for the world, allowing companies and allowing the market to go where it goes is something they've done well at the right time, and to put them at the right place in the right time. And they had a burgeoning economy. So I think newer countries have to think about attracting the right kind of free market. And also where they can learn from the States is looking at instances where, if you look at all the economic collapses, which were effectively orchestrated, in my opinion, assess where the free market got too free. And then you got to balance the free market with some socialism, a little bit of government regulation. Sometimes the citizens have to have a hand in the traffic of the free market to curtail it and get it down the right avenues so it doesn't get too out of hand and the elites don't get too much control.
Yeah, that is something that I'd like to talk about. The kind of power that the elites, the 1% that live within the United States have, the kind of enormous amount of influence and the amount of capital that they've managed to accumulate, it's staggering. How is it that a nation can have so much of its national wealth within a certain amount of individuals? Individuals, not groups of individuals, individuals. How the hell is that possible? I don't understand. How is it that you can have these people who are so ludicrously wealthy and still have a nation that has a huge amount of homelessness when there are so many houses that are vacant, uninhabited homes? How the hell is that possible? These are things I don't have any understanding towards. I'm not a social economist. I'm not an economist at all.
Let's take this away from economics then, and there's something that I think will get overlooked that we haven't touched on, and I want to get both of your takes on American space exploration and how that factors into their overall view of greatness, because I think that's very important. I feel like we've definitely spent a lot of time addressing the negatives of the United States, and rightfully so, but I feel like their legacy in space is unprecedented, and I'd just like to see how both of you feel like that factors into the overall American experiment and its legacy.
Matt, I'm sure you'll absolutely agree with me. I think the United States space exploration is remarkable. I think they are 100%, them and I suppose China and maybe Russia, they're the leaders in the world when it comes to space exploration, and ultimately this is the future. We can't be on this planet for too much longer. This is the larger, broader point, I understand that, but I think the United States is definitely the country that this is a proper argument to say that they are the greatest, because they are the ones to truly lead the world in space exploration, because these are the people that are the only ones really allowing for it. The only ones with the kind of capital to push into for this exploration to even take place. And whether or not they'll be the example to, or whether or not they'll be the ones to innovate enough to be able to sufficiently travel vast amounts of people into space onto hopefully one day a human colony is left for debate and up for history. But still, I'm sure you'll agree with me on that.
One of the many attributes that falls into making America the greatest country on earth. Space exploration. That's space exploration.
He did a little bit of Bill, you did a little bit of Donnie.
Space exploration is a small fraction of a small sliver of their contributions. And I could go off all day. You were naming instances of transgressions that America's pulled in the past that were negative. I could go all day on the positives, and I could go all day on how I think they trump the negatives. I can go all day on the space race. I can go all day on their contributions to medicine, their contributions to the automotive industry, to technological industries of all kinds, whether you're talking AI, digital, smartware, software. It's like no one has even come remotely close to doing what they've done. And even if, like, the guy that discovered the cure for cancer punched a bunch of kids in the face, he still came up with the cure for cancer. You know what I mean?
I mean, sure, but you also have to take into account that the United States has the most of its own citizens incarcerated per capita. And I mean, not to say that that's a moot point, but it's kind of a huge issue, don't you agree? See, here's the thing. I understand where you're coming from, that the positives of the United States definitely outweigh the negatives.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I think not the exact opposite per se, but I definitely have a flipped opinion of that, because I see the shortcomings of the United States as not just shortcomings, I see them as detriments to the betterment of humankind as a whole. And that is something I cannot get beyond.
So, interesting. You find the shortcomings of the United States a detriment to the entire human race. And I'm assuming it's because their influence is just so unparalleled and encompassing, right? Like something
If you wanna
happens,
think about it,
something
sure.
happens in the States, it just echoes throughout the world like a fold in time. They're
Sure.
they're so giant and influential, which brings me back to how I'm assessing their greatness, right? Because that's exactly it. Like the criticisms of America become more valid and more prominent because they're so large and because they've got so much of the world in their hands. And that's where your criticisms carry more weight, because it's not some tin pot nation on the other side of the world doing this. This is America. This is the man with the gun.
Ain't that America?
So I think the admission of saying that I think some of these negative things you bring up are compounded and are more negative because it's the states that's doing them is almost it's almost a testament to their greatness. You know what I mean? Because they're so vast, they're so big, and that's I'm not saying they're the greatest country as if in all aspects of quality they are supreme. Because like everything you brought up, I've agreed with. But they are the greatest in that respect. Would you not agree?
Yeah, but not great in a positive way.
Great in a quantitative way.
Quantitative, sure, but I mean,
Yeah.
the United States quantitatively has the majority of its citizens with what 40% of its entire citizenship. It doesn't have anything beyond a second or third grade reading level. So yeah,
Ooh.
quantitatively, they have more of
I'm
that.
gonna
than
have to
the
look
rest.
that up, and if that's not true, you're gonna be doing a shot, my friend.
Let me see. Hold on.
The moderator will look it up, good sir.
Oh, fine. Anyway, so as far as literacy goes in the world, they're in 7th place. As far as
Their school system's a disaster.
the 27th in math, they're 22nd in science, 49th in life expectancy, 178th in infant mortality, 3rd in median household income, 4th in labor force, exports. I mean, the list goes on. I mean,
Fourth and third aren't too bad.
No, but again, quantitatively speaking, sure they're the greatest, but that's, in my opinion, definitely not a good thing. These people who have this nation
is it their fault really? Like just because quantitatively they're the greatest? I mean,
greatest in the bad things, yes, that's absolutely their fault. Who else's fault could it
okay,
possibly be?
that's another great question. So we've agreed that quantitatively, like as far as a nation goes, an overall scope, like they're the biggest, they're the greatest in mass. They're like a colossal nation.
But is that a
Now I'm not saying that automatically makes them a good thing.
yeah?
But now that we've established that they're in their own league of nation, I feel it's only fair when we're comparing countries to compare
I love you, buddy.
to compare a nation like Russia to the States, to compare viable alternatives. America's a superpower.
I'm gonna have to
Right?
pause you. Shahab's
Good.
statistic on the amount of Americans at a 3rd grade reading level is incorrect. It was 19%.
Oh, 19%. Sorry, I was half off.
I apologize, but these must be punished harshly.
This is harsh treatment, man. I need more harsh treatment in my life.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, though. Going back to that point that the quantitative greatness is equated to greatness in general, I cannot disagree more. Pound for pound, statement he used previously. The Russia under the regime of Stalin has the greatest amount of human casualty, human mortality that has ever been seen. He killed more of his own people within the sphere of the Soviet Union than any other leader in the history of humankind. Now, quantitatively, is that the greatest? 100%. Is that something to be romanticized and deified? Absolutely fucking not. This is this is the kind of argument you're using, and while I do see the merit behind it, it's definitely not something that allows for the argument to say that the United States is the greatest country in the world. Yeah, they're the greatest in terms of how poorly they're doing, but in terms of certain things. But that's definitely not something to say that
I'll have to disagree with that last premise. I mean, first of all, never have I romanticized any of their shortcomings into something good, right? The only thing I've romanticized where I see you could make that, you could interpret it that way, is the fact that they have a big military. I see that as an overall great attribute, because historically it's been an attribute of greatness we've assessed in all nations. And we've got to look at America here as if we're assessing an empire of old. You know, we're looking at an ancient empire of ancient days as if we're living thousands of years in the future. Because I feel like it's only fair. We've got to throw that same lens of assessment on. Yeah, sure. You want to bring all the state's shortcomings, there are many, into the picture. Well, where's the alternative? No superpower their size has ever come even close to being as liberal as they are.
And
nobody.
Yeah, and I do acknowledge that.
So that's why when you line up all the nations in a list, they got to go on the top for overall great. They're bigger than the British Empire, right? They're more influential. Bigger militarily, bigger.
Sure. So I'm gonna challenge that.
Go ahead.
That notion. I just want to bring something up to you. So it's difficult, in my view, to say that they're greater than the British Empire.
Very difficult.
There's a certain effect of standing on the shoulder of giants that I think we definitely need to attribute to the British Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Now, who's to say that because the magnitude of an accomplishment of the United States is greater, right? Because the magnitude is greater, then a certain accomplishment of the British Empire, it's greater. Because these effects have ripples throughout time that Britain has implemented. They're the progenitors of Western civilization. Who's to say that they haven't had as large a cultural effect as the United States? British culture has been incredibly intoxicating, and it's been something we've seen spread across the world through music, through political systems, through their rule of governance, right? Through models that various countries have adopted, such as India. So,
Yeah. Forcibly so, but yes.
Yeah, forcibly so.
Well, we are talking empires here.
Yeah, we're talking empires.
We're talking specifically empires.
You know, that's a valid point, and I think that's where the American Empire trumps the British Empire, and trumps almost all other empires, because it's got that advantage of being at that point in time where it's learned from so many empires' mistakes from the past. Most notably, the British Empire. If I could get one empire that America has used as like an uncle, like a fuck-up uncle, like
uncle.
That's what he did. That's what he fucked up. It'd be England, because I think America's empire is much more economical.
You see that, Timmy?
Yeah.
You see how your old British uncle fucked you up?
Yeah.
You see what he did in India?
I think exactly. What
Don't be like.
See what England did in India, I think, is like the States. There's nothing I think the States have done, nothing negative the States have done that I think could stack up to the most negative shit the British Empire's done, because it was a different time.
What about the Philippines?
Yeah, or what about
you could say the Philippines, but I mean I don't think America's ever had a genocide that ever paralleled any of the genocides that the English Empire has perpetrated. Not to my knowledge. I mean, maybe you can count the native one, but it's kind of pre-America.
Well, it is still very much within the foundation of the United States, even though it wasn't America as a whole.
Yeah.
But here's one thing I think we're all, or at least you are forgetting. The United States is not
I'm
an
going to give you a
empire.
baby shot for that one. Sorry, for misleading our audience. How dare you, sir?
The United States
How
is
dare you.
not an empire. It has never been an empire. It has imperialist practices. But as a nation in its foundation...
I'm sorry, Shahob. I just want to clarify what I'm forcing him to have a shot for. For misleading our audience, because you said that the maltreatment of natives is considered pre-American history. Now, after the American Civil War, the United States pursued an aggressive policy against colonization of natives.
What?
Because after the American Civil War, what a lot of people forget is a significant portion of the West Coast was not even in the possession of the United States yet. California, Oregon.
Yeah, my point there was just, if you take out like pre the existence of America, you're kind of leaving out, I'd say, half the casualties. Like half of the genocide is almost when the white man initially came.
But I think the greatest genocide the United States ever accomplished in its existence is not necessarily
Push that to the side.
the death of the taking land of Aboriginal peoples, or even the killing of Aboriginal peoples. It was their allowance for one of the most heinous practices I've ever seen in the Western world, and that is the residential school system. I don't know if you guys know anything about that, but for viewers who do not, the residential school system was a primarily Christian, if not Catholic, practice to, as they put it, kill the savage, save the man. they would forcibly remove children from their places of dwelling, from their families, from their homes, put them within these schools, and remove their name, strip them of their language, give them new names and languages and
Keep
new
talking,
families.
I'll be right back.
Of course. And ensure that they would be there'd be as little Aboriginal left in them as possible. The United States allowed for this for decades, if not as long as a century. Canada allowed for this to happen as well. And Mexico, in its own very sick, twisted way, allowed for it far before either of them even had the idea. And as did Brazil and, well, Uruguay, Peru. Anyway, so taking the American example specifically.
So I want to just take things a little bit back a bit, like
Sure.
more towards the beginning.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we got to get back to the initial statement that I made at the beginning, which is America is the greatest country in the world. And so I feel like throughout the argument you brought up a lot of instances, a lot of valid and true instances of America's follies. But I still have not seen these instances arranged in the right way to convince me that they trump America's achievements. So I think we're gonna try to. I think we should just try to get around this. You bring up an instance, I bring up an instance, because a lot of it's been he brings up a genocide, I bring up a medicine, or whatever, and it's back and forth.
Let's just pause this for a quick second. Let me just see how much time we have left.
I think we should be good. I think we should be like around.
We have 15 minutes. We have 15 minutes left.
Okay. Yeah. So.
You were saying?
Yeah, I wanna get it to more the initial statement. Back to America. Is it the greatest country in the world or is it not? I want to get it back to that. And so, I want to ask you: is there a greatest country in the world? In with using the criteria that we've kind of talked about and established here.
So,
Is there one country that you can call the overall best? You know, he's the biggest kid in the class. He's the strongest. He's the fastest. He's just the overall best.
Definitely
kid,
the hottest.
right? This is what I want to ask Shahob, and I want to know your thoughts.
And I've contemplated this question myself since we first thought up of the idea of this debate, and I came to the conclusion, disappointingly perhaps, that given the criteria we have, there is no greatest nation in the world. See, to say that the United States or any country fits the criteria of the greatest nation in the world is, by definition, an absolute. And humanity has proven time and time again it doesn't deal well in absolutes.
Especially
say
only a Sith.
Deals in absolutes. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Which is in itself an absolute.
Yeah, exactly. I know, right? One of the biggest contradictions in all Star Wars. Only a Sith. Well, that's an absolute, baby. Anyway.
Continue. I'm sorry. I had to.
No, it's fine. I actually was hoping you would. There is no greatest country, nation, entity in existence currently, because that sort of thing, I don't even really know what the hell that means. I mean, talking about military power, talking about reform, talking about liberalism, talking about progressiveness, technologically, militarily, socially, all that. The United States seems to take 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. They've hit some sort of like a quantum equilibrium with their inability to truly move or achieve the greatest that they possibly can. Because in truth, no nation that currently exists can take up that mantle because none of them truly deserve it. None of them do.
So, if I could flesh that out, you're saying that we can judge whether a nation's objectively good or bad, but of which nation's the greatest, it's a fruitless endeavor to try and decide because it's impossible to quantify.
Exactly. Fruitless because it's impossible to quantify. There is no gradient chart. There is no massive overlaying piece of paper that says, okay, for a nation to be the greatest, it has to fit these things, and if it does these things, it can't be. Nothing of the sort exists. And because of that, because there's no guidance system in place, that's an impossible question to answer. You have definitely the strong contention that the United States fits this category, but I cannot because, truthfully, I still don't know what it means. And
so I mean, for clarity, I'm going to use an analogy here. I think it's dangerous to cop out of assessing who is the greatest and who is not the greatest. I think it's a dangerous thing to do, to override that and not make that assessment because you think it's impossible. My analogy, if I'm going to get if I'm making a sports team and I've got a gymnasium full of kids, they all have individual traits. They all have unique traits that are unique to them that give them an advantage over their peers in one way or another. One kid's smarter, one kid's bigger, one kid's stronger. But in assessing overall greatness, it's important to remember that it is not black and white, and there is a gradient. And although not perfect, I think there are individuals that stand above the rest, depending on what you're trying to stack them up for, right? Now, if I want to take one of these kids in the gym with me in a zombie apocalypse, right? Odds are I'm going to try to find the most durable one, the strongest one, the most intelligent one, some kind of balance of all of them.
I'm
right?
gonna give you a shot because that point was just fucking weird.
Yeah. Couple things.
So
Continue. Yeah.
if I could,
I definitely see where you're going.
you know what the analogy
No,
is,
I know.
right?
I makes sense.
So like
But it was
if I
weird as fuck.
could conclude my analogy, yeah, it was a bit abstract.
If I'm gonna get a gymnasium of kids, first of all, it sounds like any Catholic's
it's
dream.
pervy.
I'm gonna get a gymnasium of kids.
Listen, if I get a church full of kids,
Let's go. No, now.
to conclude the analogy.
If you want to finish that point, you take that
my
shot.
God. I mean, no, I see where you're going.
So the analogy, the point of the analogy was to prove that there is an assessment you can make in terms of overall greatness. There are different attributes you can weigh to assess overall greatness, and you can compare different models of countries or people or whatnot as to find out who is the greatest. So if you're still confused about what I mean by America's the greatest overall country of all time, that's what it is. I'm stacking them up to the alternatives, and I'm comparing them. Not saying they're the best, not saying they're perfect, but compared to their peers.
You know
They
what
are most certainly the best.
You know what I like to do when I'm assessing the greatness of a nation? I'll just get a gymnasium of kids.
Yeah. It's analogous.
No. I'm not.
Do you don't understand?
No, I do understand.
It's a creepy, perverted,
No,
pedophilic
it's
analogy.
None of
but it still
that.
applies.
I didn't think of any of the
And
perverted
then
shit
I
until
feed-
Stefano.
And then wait, hold on.
Well, I'm
I'll get a gymnasium of kids.
He's gonna answer. He's gonna
I'll get a
answer.
gymnasium of
Let me
kids.
pour you a shot.
It's
What the
a-
hell?
I'm the
I know,
moderator.
fuck this
Fuck
guy,
you.
fuck this
This is
guy.
my dictatorship.
You interrupted me.
This is
Mr.
his-
I'm
This
gonna
is-
get
this
a
is-
gymnasium of kids.
This is his concluding
and I'm gonna
statement.
feed them to the zombies. That is a big shot.
Drink it, motherfucker.
I'm gonna get a gymnasium of kids and feed them to the zombies.
So conclude, because I think that could be my concluding
I
statement.
still haven't made my point yet.
So yeah, you gotta conclude.
You're not gonna
Um,
make a concluding statement yet. I got a couple points I want to flesh out.
Wait, hold
that
on.
much footage yet.
We don't have much time left on this one card here. I get where you're going for. I get where you're going for, and I do understand that if you stack up the United States compared to its alternatives, then yes, I guess to an extent, and in a very confusing kind of way, it would, I guess, be better in certain ways, but not other ways. But I mean, you're talking about nations as if they're children, individuals. Nations are not individuals. They're so vast and so enormously complicated that you can't take a nation and just be like, all right, you're the kid, you're this particular kind of nation. That's not the way it is. It can't be that way, because if it was really that simple, if we could really break it down into such simplistic terms, and no offense, I don't mean, I'm talking about the analogy you made, then it really doesn't serve any purpose having this debate at all, because yeah, I guess by that definition the United States is the strongest, the best, and whatever, but it's not. That's exactly the conclusion I'm trying to come up with.
So who
it's
is?
It's the kid that, yes, is the biggest and strongest, but bullies the living shit out of anything that's even remotely weaker to it.
No,
And takes all its money, takes all its resources, fucks their mom, and burns down their house.
But also,
So, I mean, yeah, no thanks.
fights off the other alpha bully kid, so he doesn't come over and bully all the kids.
I'm gonna. I want to kind of. I think I need to critique your points a little bit, because simultaneously you're saying it's a notion that can't be decided. It's an unquantifiable nation, but you're also saying America is not the great because of X, Y, and Z.
The rest of the letters in the alphabet, sure, yeah.
So is no nation great? Is no nation greater than
No,
another nation?
I'm not saying no nation is great. I think every nation, with the exception of a couple, is great for its individual abilities, its own accomplishments, its own history. The United States has a proud, strong military history, and a history that stands against imperialism and oppression of any sort. And it has propagated imperialism and oppression on a global scale. It is, without a doubt, one of the greatest dichotomies I've ever seen, and it is for that reason, in my view, I cannot consider it the greatest, because it stands against so many of the things that it was founded on.
I have two very important questions before we get to the end of this that I want to address. This is an important one. Do you think we've passed the golden age of America? And keeping in mind, I know this is hard to quantify because we don't have the benefit of historical hindsight that we do to say, hey, Rome, the 3rd century, that's when it began to decline. And that's why it makes it a fruitless question when to debate when Rome exactly began declining. But for you guys, do you think we're past the golden age of America?
I'm going to go right ahead and say as far as standard of living, for sure. And I'm basing that just off population figures and resources.
Let me just clarify quickly. Let me just clarify quickly. We could be potentially in a small dip and come back out, and we're still in the golden age. Because even within the golden age of the Roman Empire, there were small dips and curves. But is this decline big D or is this decline small D?
Yeah, like I'd say right now we're still in a golden age, comparatively speaking. Like as far as how the American people have it, right? Like there's no major war plaguing the world that threatens to overthrow America. And yeah, I mean as far as decline, I mean I'd say it's likely there could be a decline. As far as will America cease to be the geographical and military power on Earth? I say no. I say whatever incarnation comes through the American the American continent, the power is always going to be there because no one's going to strip those armaments away from whatever government takes over in America. So I think America geographically might still be number one, as far as power goes. But
before you interject, I want him to stay on that point for a second because I don't think what you said is exactly equivalent to an American golden age.
Yeah.
Rome was still the dominant power in the world past its golden age, right? In the 3rd century when Rome was undergoing civil wars, and for those of you who don't know, 3rd century, one of the worst times to be a Roman other than the collapse. It was a century of war and plague and civil war and civil unrest and factionalism. Rome was still the greatest power in the entire world.
I'm not denying that.
So you could have a long decline that takes place over the span of hundreds of years.
Yeah, to clarify my point, I mean, perhaps as far as standard of living goes, as far as golden age goes, you look back to the golden ages of America, that could very well be on a dip. It could more than likely be on a decline. I'm more inclined to think that. But yeah, as far as power goes, I know it's besides the point. I think they're always going to be powerful.
So
right?
your
like
point,
you said, like you said about Rome, like it's the power is always going to be there, but power does not equate to golden age. Golden age to me, if you guys, I don't know if you guys disagree, but it's standard of living's good,
Economy's good.
Economy's good.
People are happy.
Disease free.
Yeah.
That to me is golden age.
Yeah.
Social upheaval is relatively sidelined by progress, right? We don't have what we have now in fucking universities, where someone farts and coughs and they're fired over the smallest ideological difference.
That fart was misogynist.
So I feel like culturally the states could be headed for a dip or decline. I'm totally open to that. I don't know. What do you guys think?
It's a little early to tell, I'd say. But
Very early.
Yeah.
But if and I mean this could be based on no more than a whim or a guess. Is the American Golden Age over? It could even be based on your gut feeling.
I'm not even quite sure as to when it really began, and it's entirely possible that the American Golden Age could be entering a sort of reemergence, or even an emergence in general. I'm not even too sure. See, when I think of the American Golden Age, for some reason I'm always hearkening back to the 1920s, the Roaring Twenties, as we put it, as it was once considered, before the great economic collapse and the Great Depression and the rest. But I honestly couldn't say. It's beyond my scope of understanding, and it's certainly beyond my scope of even trying to come into terms with how do you equate a modern day golden age to one that has existed in the past with Rome, or with even the Aztecs before the Spanish arrived, or the Chinese, or the Persians, or any given civilization that has ever existed. How do you equate those golden ages? Because certainly they have definitely varied in scale.
I don't think we're necessarily trying to compare them here. I think the question is relegated to just America.
Yeah. I think what I'm trying to say is just to get an understanding as to what a golden age is.
Yeah, I guess that'd be it, right? Like you gotta compare it to all the golden ages. Like what is the golden age is like, in my opinion, the high point for the citizens at any given time. And it could be a long stretch or a short stretch. But yeah, and you say it happened in the 20s. I think the 20s were an interesting little age. I'd say the 20s were relatively golden economically, but because they were so completely untethered economically, it was so experimental that I'd be more willing to say that the golden age, the real golden age for America, started around the baby boom time.
Sure.
I'd say maybe to around around September 11th, 2001. Somewhere in that, because I feel like that is the point in America's history where the middle class had this fighting chance, where everyone could count on having more than their parents had it. And it wasn't just about the American model, it was related to how population figures were at the time, right? Our parents got better jobs and made more money than us because they had less competitors. It also has to do with the amount of resources that were available. All resources were cheaper back then, especially the key ones that society's like bent on, like friggin' oil, crude oil, all that shit. So I mean, I think that the citizens had it better in that period right there. That's what I'd say for America.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to contest that because I obviously couldn't say anything against
Yeah,
that.
they're calling us Generation Squeeze because all of the elements of Earth are against us now. The enlightenment that our parents once benefited off having, living in North America, you know, being we're in North America, we're the only people that has this. It's gone now. Now a lot of our occupation, a lot of our jobs, a lot of our services can happen overseas because the education's there. It's on par with us now. America's not like America and Europe aren't the shining beacons in the dark that they once were. Now a kid in India can learn your job just as good as you and work for less, and you know that's how it goes. So there's less opportunities for us. We're living in a generation of squeezing.
Well,
I'd say that's an excellent point against the rather rebuttal of how America is the greatest country in the world. I think that's an excellent point.
I don't deny that America could be in a decline, and I never denied that, right?
Yeah.
My statement initially was, spite the shortcomings and spite the future shortcomings, they are still the greatest. You look at their legacy, I still think they're the greatest.
Hold on, because one kid, it's true, a kid in India could effectively learn your job, do it more effectively than you. What about a gymnasium of kids in India?
Jesus.
We have to test it and find out.
Find those gymnasiums of kids.
Yeah.
You must do this for the betterment
What
of
about
our kind.
gymnasiums in kids? What about gymnasiums full of kids? What about kids full of gymnasiums?
I like it.
Settle down there. Settle down there.
Simmer down, boy.
Too progressive.
Simmer down.
Kill the heretic.
Heretic. So
So I'm guessing we all kind of agree on that.
Sure.
We're open to a curve.
I guess so. Yeah.
I'm gonna preface this next statement with what I think the American dream is. I think the American dream is the ability to land on the shores of Ellis Island and with elbow grease and sweat work your way up into the middle class comfortably. Not make yourself rich, but work your way up into the middle class. To me, that is the American dream. Now, is the American dream dead?
I think the American dream only makes sense if you're asleep. Personally.
Be a cool name for a book.
Roll credits.
Yeah, dude, that's like a drop drumsticks moment.
If we had an audience, they'd be.
I mean, it's a little bit vague what you said because middle class, like that definition, is just completely changed since back in the day. Like back in the day, it used to be you owned a house, you owned a car, maybe 2 cars, you had 4 kids, but now it's
You
different.
sound like a 40-year-old Italian man for some reason. I don't know. I
Yeah?
just get that vibe when you just said that. Yeah, like back in the day.
But
you
listen,
get on
no,
the car.
the bottom line is
But let me tell you something.
what it means to be middle class.
is anyone who has 4 more prosciuttos hanging in their
Yeah.
basement, okay?
What it means.
Any less than the 3, you are lower middle class,
So,
okay?
so good.
What it means to be middle class these days, I think it's changed. Like certain things have gotten better for the middle class, certain things have gotten worse. I mean, you can't own a giant house all to yourself anymore because it's too expensive, at least in this part of the world.
Perhaps, yeah.
But you've got access to technology that people from the past would only dream of having access to, right? So it's kind of like a trade-off. Like the American dream seems to kind of, because now I think, in my opinion, the American dream would be just, you know, you own like a flat, you have a phone, you got healthcare, and
Yeah, but I think you both missed the point, and the point is not, is the middle class still existing today? Because it is, right? We still have a middle class. My question to you is not, does the middle class still exist, or is the middle class better off than they were 30 years ago? My question is has class mobility in the United States ossified? Ossified meaning gotten harder and more rigid. Is it more difficult for a new immigrant to work their way into the middle class, or for somebody living in a trailer park to work their way into? I think is there less opportunities to break your way through the social strata? I think ultimately the American dream is class mobility.
Yeah, I think we could all agree that it's gotten harder for sure, right?
I don't know. I see the rhetoric of the American dream and that large, vague understanding of what the hell that even means. And I do understand that it basically generates off the singular point that America is the land of opportunity, which is great. The rhetoric is very beautiful. However, you take that kind of opportunity and see exactly just how large of a fallacy that is. You know, every immigrant that has come here within the past 100 years, not just in the United States, but in Canada, really, those are the only two countries that, you know, many immigrants are fleeing towards. It's not exactly a haven, or in a way, it has never been a haven, and it's been a very difficult life of struggle and hardship, and sometimes, for the most part, it has been something that doesn't necessarily reap reward or benefit. However, that being said, I don't know. I think of the American dream as little more than a cruel fantasy.
Would you not agree that it's comparatively a haven?
You, sir, failed to address the question.
Did I? Oh.
Has social mobility? Does social mobility know? Because I define the American dream, and you, sir, refuse to operate under my definition of the American dream.
Oh, that doesn't mean he denied the
What?
question. He might have a different definition, like with the American dream.
Any
so confused.
definition of the American dream other than mine is incorrect.
So you punish
This
me
guy's like
with
a
a
dictator
shot.
of a
What the
moderator.
fuck is this?
I am a dictator, I'm a penis potato,
Oh,
and I rule this debate with an iron
Dictator.
fist. This will always be a world of penis potatoes, aka dictators.
If we get back to the American
Take the
dream,
shot.
Shahob
Take
brought
the
up
shot.
Shahob brought up a point that many aspects of the American dream were like very rhetorical, and I'd agree with them. I think like when there was this, some people have this cemented idea of what the American dream was a long time ago, and I think there's so many excesses tied to that. And I think the real American dream, when you take a step back, or American dream, just dream overall in life, is what Stefano was bringing up, to work your way up to that comfortable class in life where you can just, take breaks when you need to, support your loved ones, be healthy, and get by. I think the American dream is much more essential than a lot of American people have made it out to be. I think it's a lot more Spartan and primitive and grass, like, you know what I mean? It's a lot more innate than we think it is. Food, shelter, safety, health. Like, it's simple shit. I don't think it's a grass and a lawnmower and 3 cars and Uncle Bobby on the porch having a Pabst Blue Ribbon.
Yeah, the nuclear family ideal, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be that, I don't even think kids are even going to be much of a thing in the future, because you have a kid, it's like...
Unless they're in gymnasiums.
It's a burden. It's a burden. We keep going back to kids, eh?
You're the one that goes
Yeah, I keep going back to kids.
He said kids in India, kids.
Man, I'm Freudian slipping today.
Yeah, man, he is just shoving his head further and further up that Freudian anus.
That Freudian anus.
Now, before we get back to discussing the point, I think it's important to say that the American dream has been fairly malleable over time. So,
Yeah.
Pre-industrialization, the American dream was the yeoman farmer. Yeoman farmer being an independent, small landowning farmer that can work for themselves and support themselves off their own land. You have a small parcel of land. Now, you listen here, you see, you got a small parcel of land, you see, 4 horses, you see, and 3 or 4 slaves, you see. That was the American dream at one point. The small landowning farmer. With the Industrial Revolution, that atrophied, right? There was no room for the small landowning farmer. And food production, became the responsibility of larger countries. Small landowning farmers, their estates were bought up, they were pushed off their land, people fled into cities and had to take, industrial labor. And the American dream became malleable. There was a short period of duress, but it changed and it adapted and it became, a suburban family with a white picket fence. And who knows? Again, it's hard to quantify, but maybe it's dead. Maybe the American dream's just adapting.
Yeah, that's a great point. Maybe it's not dead, it's just adapting.
Or maybe it never existed to begin with.
Well, it's a standard, so it technically always existed, but...
I'm not too sure if it's necessarily a standard. It's too vague to be a standard, don't you think? But again, I mean, that's
really.
the statement to say that the American dream is vague is by itself vague. So, I don't know. I don't necessarily adhere to the notion of the American dream because, in a way, I still don't really fully understand what it means. And in another way, I don't understand how it is something to really look towards because it's something that's been, not a fallacy per se, but definitely not as well practiced as the rhetoric makes it sound, That's just the way I feel.
yeah, not due to the people. I mean, the fact that the people kept that at heart, like this American dream, they held this standard up. Like, this is something we got to reach. It's not their fault that not everyone could reach it. I mean, again, like, the American dream has to adapt because the times are changing. Like, it's harder to get the dream job now. It's harder to have job security till the end of your days, right? So the American dream has to become, like, it has to be malleable, and that's why I think I understand why you're a little bit confused over what the definition of it is, because I don't think there is a proper definition. I think it's like the safe standard of life that you should aim to attain for.
But why does that have to be
an
an American dream? That's like,
I think the Americans just, like, they're distinctly patriotic, and they did it as like a goal set kind of thing. You know what I mean? They just did this to set a goal for themselves. Yeah. I don't think it matters what kind of dream it is, the Canadian dream, Mexican dream, whatever.
Exactly.
I think at the end of the day, like, these are societal goals. Like, these are individual goals that lead to a healthier society to aim for, that the everyday person should aim for. And I think for there to be a standard being circulated around the populace of, like, you know, we should all try to be like this. We should all try to attain this. I think it's overall, like, a good thing. Would you guys not agree?
Sure. Yeah. No.
I would say so, but if I were to go into the concept of the Canadian dream and the Mexican dream that you're talking about, the Canadian dream would be, I'll tell you what, the Canadian dream here is I'll tell you, it's a case of Chicory light beer. It's a nice warm igloo for a family to settle in overnight, and a ripe, girthy polar bear to ride to work.
So,
the Mexican dream is, hey, ese, 4 burritos and a churro.
Jesus Christ.
4 burritos and a churro.
For those of you who don't,
I'm all right, ese.
For those of you who don't know, I'm actually Mexican, so
I'll tell you what, ese, I got a wardrobe full of lumberjack shirts that I can wear with just the top button done up. That's the Mexican dream. I'll tell you.
Let's say, shut the fuck up, man. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
If I can lift my free weights in a parking lot, the Mexican dream is still alive.
I think we should get to just because I think we've kind of blended into, like, more of a discussion. When you want to get to the conclusions of our respective arguments, do you want us to keep discussing? Because we're kind of off topic.
Extremely off topic. Yeah. No.
Is there anything else I really wanted to get to in this? Yeah, because we've kind of covered the negatives, and if I start bringing up the negatives of the American legacy, we kind of know what we're going to get bogged down in. Yeah. If I bring up the positives, we know what we're going to get bogged down in.
Yep.
So, I think one more important question to judge, one very, 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 very important question to judge, and this goes down to a lot of the problems that the United States has. I think what I'd like to get your opinion on is, if the United States, how much of the United States' problems are endemic to its size and unavoidable? And how much of its problems are just, can it be held accountable for? Because if we're choosing the format of government that the United States has, with the large military and the imperialistic past, how much of that is just endemic to being a nation in the world? Like, what nation hasn't been carved out in war? And how much can we hold them responsible for? I guess that's what I want to get at.
Great question.
That is a good question. No, absolutely. My immediate stance would be, yes, it's possible that due to the sheer size and enormity of the United States as a whole, that perhaps a lot of the things that they have done may have been unavoidable. But I like to think more optimistically than that. And interestingly enough, that allows me to think more pessimistically about the United States. They are at the point where, in many ways, they are at the top of the world. And yet they choose, as not just a nation, but as a people, as a political state, as a government, to carry out these heinous acts, to destroy so much of the world in order to ensure their survival and their continuity. To me, that is the exact opposite. That is the exact detriment to the greatest country in the world, because the greatest country in the world, to my understanding and to the way I would like to envision what the greatest country in the world would do, is to the betterment of all mankind in almost every aspect of existence. And the United States has failed to do that, not just in individual instances, but as a whole. It propagates an imperialist agenda of a spreading of destruction and intervention that it has absolutely no place in doing. It could be the bastion, it could be the focus that the world all looks towards and says, we have to get to this level of greatness ourselves. And it just doesn't.
So,
not to me.
Which country has gotten closer?
Again, none of them have
None
gotten
of
closer.
them. None of them.
Because the only thing, for me,
I think there's an error. There's an error in logic here because I feel like you're failing to assess some achievements over other achievements, and I think that's where we can't meet because even though again the negative she said is correct, it happened, but
it's happening.
I
Not
can't.
just happened. It is happening right now.
It is happening as we speak right now. America has imperialistic wars in multiple continents. That being said, I can't look at history with these gray lenses and say, America's contributions, all the contributions they've contributed, I can't stack them up to any other country. It's like, why not?
Now, no, I don't want you to just address Shahab's point. I also want you to address my question here. What parts of America's failures are endemic to being a large power, right? And how much of it do you think can they be held accountable for?
Okay, so, I mean, what stands out about America's size, first and foremost, their military size. We've talked at great length about it, and I think that brings them the majority of their size. The fact they have a big military. So a lot of things happen when you have a giant military, right? A lot is expected of you. A lot of interventions are expected. A lot of alliances. A lot of pacts. A lot of influence comes along with it. A lot of problems come along with influence. So just being the greatest. Like Stefan said, I just agree with that in general. Shit comes along when you've got a big umbrella, you know? You fucking cover this side of the world, that side of the world. You got your hands and tentacles in every aspect of the machine that runs the world in China and Russia. There's going to be issues. There's going to be conflicts of interest. And it only makes sense that they have the most amount of conflicts of interest because they have the most interests, right? It's the greatest amount of interest. So yeah, I mean, I just agree with that. Like, which one in particular? I don't know. I'd say the fact because they've got a big military, so, you know, they're embroiled in conflicts.
Okay, I think you guys both made some very strong points. Ultimately, I can't really say who won this debate. I'm going to leave that up to you, our TV syndicated audience.
We can do some concluding statements.
Now, before we do concluding statements, I have an important segment that I want you guys to both do. For a minute, you will make your case for America being the greatest or not the greatest ever in the voice of a president of your choice.
All right.
Now, Shahob has elected Reagan.
I'm actually going to choose a different president now.
Who are you going to be?
Since I'm the opposition. No.
You're going to be a weak, feeble man like Jimmy Carter?
I should probably
a scum like Jimmy Carter?
I should probably be Obama.
Obama?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we've got Shahob
Hey.
Shabino as Obongo. Barack Hussein Obongo. We've got Lucas over here as...
Nixon? I guess.
You want to do Nixon?
I'll do Nixon.
I thought you'd do Trump. I thought you'd do...
Oh, I'll do Trump.
No,
Yeah,
you
Trump.
pick. If you want to do Nixon, Richard Dixon, do Richard
No,
Nixon.
I can just do a better Trump impression than I do Nixon.
Okay, go for Trump then. Okay, Lucas.
Can I go first?
Yes.
All right. So I have the idea in my thoughts. I just don't want to
Go, kill it.
All right. Now, let me be clear. I gotta say, the United States is a great nation with many faults. The United States can be so much better than it has been in recent times. Now, let me be clear. What I'm saying has to be mattered. The United States is not perfect. It is a great nation, but it could be so much more. And it is for that reason the United States is not the greatest nation in the world. And that's okay. Because the United States is still a great nation, even though it's not the greatest of nations. And that's all I got to say about that.
Now, Mr. Obama, I would just like to take everything you just said and repeal all the good in it, and then pass the floor to President Trump and undo everything you've done over the past 8 years.
Woo!
Or attempt to.
But you can have this shot as consolation.
Allahu Akbar.
Allahu Akbar! So, Mr. Trump, you now have the floor.
I
I want you all to picture the last 150 years without America. Anarchy. Germans win World War II. They probably win World War I as well. It's anarchy.
That's too many syllables.
I feel like just because America could be a terrific country, it does not detract from the fact that they are a terrific country. They're the most terrific country. Best medicine, best military, best technology, best contributions to major warfare. They are huge. They're the best. We love to hate them because they're so good and ripe and sexy and plump. I think America is the best country in the world. I wanna kiss it and snuggle it.
Like
I wanna be with it.
Okay, Mr. Trump, you are done. We're just going to push you to the side and forget the next 4 years as a terrible lap. And
I'm out of here. I'm out of here.
I just want to say that this
Ladies and gentlemen, it has been an absolute honor. Thank you so much for listening.
Guys, thanks for tuning in. Now, we just want to end this. I don't know where President Trump went. We're going to end this with the quote of the day. I have one.
Oh, perfect. Go for
All
it.
right? Now, give a little bit of background. Scipio Africanus, perhaps the greatest general of Roman history, defeated Hannibal, the man who brought Rome to its knees,
Definitely.
and ensured that Rome would live as an empire for the next 1,000-odd years.
This was during the Republic.
Now, hold on. Let's not get into a debate because something could be a republic and an empire at the same time. That's why Rome was the Republican Empire, motherfuckers.
Just like the United States.
So, well, yeah, now it is actually the Republican Empire.
Yeah, seriously.
So, Scipio, embroiled in a political scandal towards the end of his days, was ostracized from Rome, his honor stripped from him. Scipio, the man, was bitter about this and elected to have his bones buried outside of the city of Rome as one last personal snub to the country that rejected him despite his great accomplishments. Now, on his gravestone, and you can read it, to this day, in the city of Capua, it reads, "Ungrateful motherland, you shall not even have my bones." If that isn't the greatest middle finger of all time, I don't know what is. That is our quote of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. Fuck off.
Peace. Thank you very much.